Inside of Berlin in April 1945, there was chaos as the Soviet Red Army encircled the city and they shot huge amounts of artillery onto it. The first Soviet ground forces began to drive into the black heart of the Third Reich on the 23rd of April 1945, but 4 days later the entire city was cut off from the outside world. It was a few days later that the Führer died by his own hand inside of the Führer bunker, his underground complex of rooms underneath the Reich Chancellery. But the situation inside of Berlin was incredibly dire, and every man was ordered to lay their lives down to repel the Soviet Red Army. With this, the Volkssturm was put into action, the civilian militia, and this even saw children given weapons to fight inside of Berlin. But there was terror on the streets, initiated by the SS and the Nazis themselves, in which civilians were left strung up from lampposts, executed for the fact they refused to fight for Hitler's crumbling capital. In this video, we look at the fates of those men who were executed inside of Berlin for cowardice and desertion in the very few final days of the Second World War in Europe. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The situation in Berlin was incredibly chaotic, and General Helmut Feidling was given forces to defend the city. These were not necessarily skilled and were made up of very depleted Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS divisions. This was roughly 45,000 men, but they were also backed up by members of the Berlin police force who were armed, child soldiers who were compulsory defenders brought in from the Hitler Youth, and also members of the Volkssturm, a militia force made up of men who were not in the military. This included 40,000 elderly men, some who had been in the army, and others who were even veterans of World War I. Some of these were men in their 80s who took up the fight to defend Berlin, and the tactics deployed were based on pure survival. It was urban warfare at its most chaotic, and civilians armed with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons in cellars, windows and hiding behind ruins would ambush tanks and Soviet vehicles, and they would then run off to regain more single-shot anti-tank weapons. Hitler knew the groups were not the greatest, and he said that, and I quote, "Experience in the East has shown that Volkssturm, emergency and reserve units have little fighting value when left to themselves and can be quickly destroyed. The fighting value of these units, which are for the most part strong in numbers but weak in the armaments required for modern battle, is immeasurably higher when they go into action with troops of the regular army in the field." The Volkssturm were most extensively used inside the city of Berlin, and units fought all over the city, but the battle was completely devastating for their numbers. Civilians could not match the training and ferocity of the Soviet Red Army, and also their numbers, and many of them had defeatist attitudes already, but were forced to fight as they knew they would be dead if they did not. In Berlin there were 60,000 men of the Volkssturm, but a force of over 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, 6,350 tanks, and over 40,000 artillery pieces were sent to capture Berlin, and even the most skilled SS soldiers were no match for the strength in numbers. Inside of Berlin, Hitler, when he heard of the failings of the group, thought he was being betrayed by the German people, and older members of the Volkssturm began to find hiding places. But in the final days of the Second World War in Europe, upon Hitler's orders, there were many executions of civilians in the most brutal and barbaric ways. Hitler wanted everyone to lay their life down and give everything for the Reich, and those who wouldn't he deemed as traitors, deserters and disloyal, and he ordered them to be executed inside of Berlin. General Ferdinand Schörner, the last commander-in-chief of the German army, issued a no-mercy series of executions of any straggler who was found behind the front lines without orders to fight, and with this Joseph Goebbels, the Gauleiter of Berlin, took inspiration, and he ordered a proclamation over the radio. He said in this, which was broadcasted to the defenders of the city, that any man not found doing his duty will be hanged from a lamppost after a summary judgment. Moreover, placards will be attached to the corpses stating, "I've been hanged here because I am too cowardly to defend the capital of the Reich. I have been hanged because I did not believe in the Führer. I am a deserter, and for this reason I shall not see this turning point in history." This order struck fear into the hearts of the German people in Berlin, as they knew they now faced almost certain death. It was either fight the might of the Soviet Red Army, or face being rounded up and executed by the death squads which were sweeping through the city. There were members of the SS or army who were with orders to shoot and kill those who were hiding for cowardice and those who were refusing to fight. This was seen as the ultimate desertion and betrayal of the Reich. There were some members of the SS who knew what was on the horizon for them, and they knew that the crimes of their group and that they would be hunted at the end of the Second World War. Because of this, some even tried to cut out their blood group tattoo on their arms. But inside of Berlin, there were many who were executed by the death squads. One German who was living inside the city saw the terror and claimed that boys who were found hiding were hanged as traitors by the SS as a warning that he who was not brave enough to fight had to die. When trees were not available, people were strung up from lampposts. They were hanging everywhere, military and civilian, men and women, ordinary citizens who had been executed by a small group of fanatics. There are many incidents of people being strung up from lampposts and who were claimed to have been deserters, and the Soviets would fight street to street, seeing these bodies just hanging. The civilians and women would be frightened of them, and for many people it had the effort to force them into fighting out of fear, but some felt incredibly demotivated by what they saw, their neighbours strung up from lampposts, and they felt even more disillusioned with the Third Reich and the crumbling dictatorship which they had supported for years before. The atmosphere within the German civilian population of Berlin was terrible, and one 19-year-old man who was forced to fight claimed that to desert was never an option, it meant the death penalty. Another man who experienced a battle as a child outlined the cruelty of those SS soldiers who executed those inside of Berlin who were said to have been cowards. He claimed anyone that put a white bandage on their arm to surrender was hanged by the SS. I saw them hanging there. For one of them, I even had to write a sign saying I am a coward. I wanted to deliver the German Reich to communism. There was one poor soldier at Steglitz Town Hall and another near my place. It was the worst thing I experienced as a boy. The SS willingly patrolled the city, looking for those to execute, as the order had been given for them to do this, and they then hanged people from anything they could find. The reason they did this was rather medieval, as it was done to strike fear into the hearts of the Berlin population and to keep them away from refusing to fight the enemy. Any civilian who surrendered to the enemy fell victim to the SS, and their bodies were then even dumped at crossroads or bridges or even town squares and public areas. One man at Zienkirchplatz was executed for raising the white flag from his window, and in another area a German soldier was hanged from a lamppost and a sign placed around his neck that read, "I, Sergeant Lehrman, was too cowardly to defend women and children." Things inside of Berlin continued to get worse as the electricity was shut off and food supplies ran very low, and the water and sewer system also began to fail, leading to more people to turn their backs on the fighting and to try and hide to avoid any injury or death fighting the Soviets. The terror inside of Berlin was awful, and even until the final minutes of the conflict, there was fighting in and around the city. People inside of Plötzensee prison were being executed as the Gestapo were concerned about political prisoners telling the evils of the Nazi regime. The executions of those who refused to fight and the posthumous display of their remains was a harrowing way in which the Nazis tried to force everyone to fight and to lay their lives down for Hitler and the Nazis. But many knew it was a death sentence in itself to fight for the heart of the Reich. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.